on the list of participants? Okay. So we're going to hear from our speaker, and I won't take too much of our time this afternoon. Uh, if we will have time for Q&A, there, for those of you who used Zoom in the past, you'll see along the bottom of your screen your ability to mute and start and stop your video. And once the presentation starts, we'll ask everyone to be on mute so that we don't have extraneous background noise. Then next to the list of participants, we have a chat box. And if you would click on that, that is the place. If you have a question that you want our presenter to respond to, open the chat box, type in your question. My job during the presentation will be to monitor that chat box. And then when the Q&A time comes, I'll be relaying those questions to our speaker. So that's my role in this. I'll just once again remind you to mute, as I will do now, as I turn over work to our esteemed Vice Chair of the Ethiopian Eritrea Return Peace Corps Volunteer Group on Ethiopia 1, I believe. Leo, take it away.
Yes, well, thank you, Chuck. Well, this is certainly a pleasure to greet you, Cynthia. Cynthia Sciacca is going to give us a presentation from her works at it's the Baltimore. No, it's not Baltimore. I'm sorry, the name of the gallery was in Baltimore. Anyway, but I'm just simply here. This is going to be conducted by Christine Sciacca, and here is Christine.
Thank you, Leo. Was somebody, I did send Cindy a bio. I don't know. I'm happy to talk about my own biography, but I don't know if somebody wanted to.
Could you please just quickly, a brief bio would be good. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you all for the very kind invitation. My name is Dr. Christine Sciacca. I am the curator of European Art 300 to 1400 CE at the Walters Art Museum, and that's a very long way of saying that I'm the curator of medieval objects at the Walters. And you might be wondering what a curator of European art is doing curating an Ethiopia show. At the Walters, we have one of the largest collections of Ethiopian art outside of Ethiopia, about 225 objects. And these are objects that actually fall under my purview because they were collected as a collection of Christian art objects from Ethiopia, and they fit very well with our existing artworks from other Eastern Orthodox Christianities, Armenia, Greece, Russia, and so forth. And so this is, in that way, sort of falls under my purview, as do all those other Eastern Orthodox Christianities. And so this actually was a great fit for me because I started studying Ethiopian art about 25 years ago as a graduate student. I went to Columbia University where I got my MPhil and PhD. I got my bachelor's from Cornell University, all in art history. And when I arrived at Columbia, I was studying medieval manuscripts and mostly from places in Europe. And I thought I'm a young, stupid graduate student. I think I know everything about manuscripts. And I took, very early in my time at Columbia, took an African art survey. And my professor, Zoe Struther, went through a few units, and then she went to Ethiopia and she put up Ethiopian manuscripts on the screen. And my head kind of exploded because I had never heard that there was a manuscript tradition, a Christian manuscript tradition in Ethiopia at the same time as what was being produced in Europe at the sort of same types of books, gospel books, and so forth. And it completely shifted my worldview. And at the time, it was actually very difficult to study Ethiopian art because not only was it not taught in medieval classes, it was also not taught frequently in African art classes. It was always seen as sort of something different from all other types of African art. So I really lucked out sort of having that insight, and I'm very pleased that 25 years later, there are actually a lot of professors now who are trying to incorporate this material into medieval courses, into African art courses. And I hope that, this exhibition that I've just completed at the Walters, Ethiopia at the Crossroads, will only continue that. There was a catalog that accompanies it that is not sort of officially out yet, that we got some advanced copies that we were able to purchase if you came in person to the museum, but those sold out. So anyway, the essays in there will also hopefully be of use to future students of Ethiopian art and also specialists as well. So that's a little bit of my story about how I came to Ethiopian art. I didn't just take that one course. I wound up doing Ethiopian art as my minor field of study. I wanted to kind of stick to the manuscripts as I was for my my major in medieval European manuscripts. And so he said, nope, you got to do all of Ethiopian art. So at the time it was quite panicking, but it really served me well now 25 years later curating this exhibition. So I interviewed for the Walters Art Museum job. I should say where sort of where I went from graduate school. I was a curator of manuscripts at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles for over 10 years. Curated sort of about 10 different exhibitions there. My final exhibition there was called Florence at the Dawn of the Renaissance. It was all about painting and illumination at the time of Giotto, so 1300 to 1350, very distinct time period. Sort of, you know, Giotto's time period up to the Black Death, basically, in Ethiopia. So that was a wonderful experience. I worked a lot with loans from Italian collections. This actually helped me for the loans that I secured from Ethiopia that came to the exhibition. So, you know, the Italians left their system of bureaucracy in terms of all the ministries. And so very much the same system in Ethiopia. So after sort of having been at the Getty for quite some time, I also worked, by the way, as a graduate student, I worked at the Cloisters Museum in New York. So really working with all types of medieval art and all types of media. I also worked at the British Library as an intern as well, and several other places as well. I kind of knew early on that I wanted to be a curator, to be a museum person. So I actually did kind of wore all the hats in any museum that would take me. I did every type of job that I could. But then went on to pursue my PhD at Columbia in art history and to really, you know, start work as a curator. So I came to the Walters about 7 years ago. I like to joke that they hired me because I pitched the idea for this Ethiopia show at my interview. It was something that was a bit of a no-brainer for the Walters. So I mentioned earlier that we have one of the largest collections of Ethiopian art. We did the first major exhibition of Ethiopian art in this country called African Zion back in 1993. If you didn't see it at the Walters, and some of you I know did, it also traveled to 7 other venues across the United States. So that catalog for that exhibition was actually my textbook when I was studying, one of my many textbooks when I was studying Ethiopian art as a graduate student. And also just because of the community we have here in Baltimore and in our DC, Baltimore, sort of DC, Maryland, Northern Virginia area, we have the largest Ethiopian diaspora population in the US and one of the largest outside of Ethiopia. So all of these things kind of came together, and it was the easiest exhibition proposal I have ever had to do. I kind of pitched it, and then they hired me, and then they said, go forth. And so this exhibition is the product of those 7 years of work. I had a lot of help with this exhibition. So I had several advisory committees, a kind of academic advisory committee who became, these were other curators, professors who have all worked on various aspects of Ethiopian art, but also in many other fields. So the way that this exhibition was different from African Zion looked just at the Christian art of Ethiopia and Ethiopia more or less in isolation. And the one thing that I think you will all know is that Ethiopia is far from isolated, maybe more so today because it is now a landlocked country, but it was not during the Middle Ages, of course. It had an entire Red Sea coast, has and also does today have access to the Nile, has access to the Indian Ocean and up the Nile into the Mediterranean, connecting to Europe. So my concept for this exhibition, Ethiopia at the Crossroads, is to really think about what are all these relationships that Ethiopia had with its surrounding cultures, and what were the conversations that occurred between them between those different cultures. So I am going to share my PowerPoint because you just don't want to see just me. You'd like to see some images of what this show looked like at the Walters, I think. So let me see. Here we go. I'm gonna just back up a little bit here. Back up. Okay. So this is what you would have seen if you had come to the Walters between December 3rd of last year and March 3rd of this year. You would have seen our special exhibition galleries on our first floor, right here in Baltimore in the Mount Vernon neighborhood, decorated in beautiful shades of green, yellow, and red, the colors of the Ethiopian flag. So I mentioned I had several advisory committees. I had the academic advisory committee. So what I did with those folks was I challenged them. They may have studied, Armenian art or Indian art or Italian art. What was the impact of Ethiopia on their various fields? And for some people, it was a very simple answer. For others, it was a bit more challenging, but they all agreed that it was a very significant relationship that Ethiopia had with those places. And those folks actually mostly became my catalog authors as well. So if you can get a hand of your on the catalog, should arrive on Amazon in early April, or you can order it from our own bookstore beginning late March, early April. It is a book that contains 30 authors writing essays about various aspects of Ethiopian art and culture and all those surrounding cultures and their relationship to them. I also had an incredible community advisory committee. Obviously, I've been studying this material for 25 years, but I'm not clearly Ethiopian myself. And so these were all folks from the DMV area, either Ethiopian or Ethiopian American. I had Ethiopian Orthodox priests. I had, nurses, actresses, teachers, all sort of really invested in the local community, helping me with various aspects of the show and kind of getting the word out and really advising me on different points, just to make sure that I was telling their story and telling the stories that they wanted to hear. So the result you see in front of you with this color scheme is actually the result of one question I posed to them, which was, what's the look and feel of the exhibition that you would like? And what colors do you think about when you think of Ethiopia? We always think about color when we think about museum design and exhibition design. And so they said, well, it should be very filled with light. And I said, our conservators are not going to like that idea at all. But we were able to convey that, as you'll see, through the white walls. And also they said they wanted to see the colors of the Ethiopian flag. So as you walk through this exhibition, I can show you the floor plan, and then I'll back up. This is how it looks. So our galleries, our special exhibition galleries, are kind of a U shape. So this is the title wall right here that you just saw, and then you would go in through green, pass around to yellow, and then end with red. So you actually walk through the flag. If any of you are frequent museum goers, you will know that white walls and bright colors are not typically what you see in museums, especially not with medieval art. And so this was a bit of a risk. I even, had to have a little conversation with the powers that be that this was too bright. And I said, no, I think we need to stay true to the flag. And also what I realized, having worked with this material for quite some time, is the paintings of Ethiopia actually reflect this color palette. So whoever designed the flag in the 19th century was really thinking about Ethiopian visual culture, and it actually worked incredibly well. Everyone seemed to really love the color, and it gave it a very joyful feeling walking through the exhibition. I think we all feel that Ethiopia could use a little joy. It's been going through some very difficult times of late. So not only did they, my community advisory, advise me on various aspects of look and feel, the title, so sort of, points of question in the exhibition, I also brought their voices and their faces into the gallery. So what you can see here against the wall, there was sort of a, what's not in this shot is the kind of intro text and a map showing you where Ethiopia is. And also I had a series of 5 iPads with recordings of different community advisory members talking about various aspects of the show. And this very first one in the beginning was actually self-recorded. And so we asked various people who wanted to talk about the impact of Ethiopian art in their own lives. They were filming themselves for 30 seconds. And I love these videos because you can see Ethiopian art behind them in almost every single video, whether they're filming in their office or their home. This is a lived experience to live with Ethiopian art in their lives. And so it was a really important for me to have those insights and for visitors to see those insights. I should say that the videos are on our YouTube channel, our Walters Art Museum YouTube channel, so you can watch them from the comfort of your couch. They're really wonderful, and I would recommend that you have a look at those. I mentioned there was a map on the title wall, so I'll just bring you back to the map. I realize I'm preaching to the choir in this group. You all know where Ethiopia is and how it sits geographically. So it is in the Horn of Africa, this kind of juncture between Africa, Asia, and Europe. And so again, you have a very close connection across the Red Sea to modern day Yemen, what was known in the ancient period as South Arabia. You have connections across the Indian Ocean to the Indian subcontinent. You can go up the Nile through Sudan, Egypt, into the Mediterranean Sea, and make connections with Europe and West Asia as well. And so it was really all those water routes were what was giving Ethiopia such great access to the rest of the world that goes way, way back to the ancient period. One of my big soapbox topics is that medieval people traveled. I know we like to think that we're the only ones who travel long distances, but in fact, they were very much doing this in the Middle Ages as well. Even if though the journeys were often arduous, long, so forth, people did make those journeys. And so you have lots of connections, global connections that we've sort of written out of what we think about modern day history today. So I showed you the basic layout here to explain kind of the way I've arranged things. I had a little bit of a sort of dilemma because I had on the one hand visitors who I expected from the Ethiopian community, any one of whom could have probably curated this show. And then on the other hand, I have museum visitors who know nothing about Ethiopian art and culture. So what I decided to do with this green section is make a rather long introductory section to the show, kind of giving you the nuts and bolts. What were the major religions in Ethiopia, the language, some of the foundational stories like the Queen of Sheba and Lucy, to kind of give visitors a toolbox to then proceed to the yellow section, where we start a chronological sweep. So from the earliest context that we know of that Ethiopia had with South Arabia, moving on to Coptic Egypt, Armenia, Italy, and so forth, all the way up to the present day. And that's kind of the sort of last two sections of the show. And here was what it looked like in the green section when you walked in. It looks not like that right now. Everything is off the walls and they're already repainting for the next show. It is rather depressing, but I did mention in the early chat that the exhibition will be traveling. It's on its way right now to the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, just north of Boston. And then after that, we'll be going to the Toledo Museum of Art in Toledo, Ohio. So I'll have a final slide at the end of the presentation with the exhibition dates for those two places in case you live in those areas or you have family and friends in those areas. I would encourage you to catch the show if you didn't see it in Baltimore, or even if you did see it in Baltimore. I like to myself, I mean, obviously I'm a curator, so I like to do this, but if I really like an exhibition, I like to see it in different venues because it's always a little bit different and a slightly different take on it. So in this, let me just back up here. Here we go. Okay, so we have, as you walk into this first section, the kind of long view down the gallery, you see a scene that many of you will be familiar with, the Aksum Stele in the north part of Ethiopia, the first capital of Ethiopia and the Aksumite Empire. And what we tried to do in this space is to give people and make it a really immersive experience. So we have large wall murals, this Aksum scene. We also have a scene of an Ethiopian church procession. And we also have we'll have a little bit, there was a little bit of church chant that kind of floated through the galleries. Our third iPad in the galleries did not have an earpiece. It was actually meant to sort of pipe into the galleries. We went and filmed at an Ethiopian Orthodox church in Washington and some of their ceremonies that they were performing. And so you had a little bit of the church chant through the galleries. We also introduced a scent element as well. So I don't know if you can see it here, but this little sort of almost looks like a business card holder or rack on the wall right here. And in those racks, we had these cards. Let me see right here. They are indeed business card size. And I'm going to put one up. So the one that I'm showing you right there was next to our the incense burner on loan to us from the Peabody Essex Museum. And on these cards, you were prompted to scratch this center part here, and you would get the scent of frankincense in this case. And I can still smell it right now. And however, it is actually pretty subtle. So you really have to scratch it to experience it. So you could kind of get the feeling of what you would experience if you were actually at an Ethiopian Orthodox church ceremony. I'll come back to the others. We also have this, it's like detail of a basket. So that was paired with berbere spice, which I'm sure you will all know is the main spice in Ethiopian cooking. And then finally, the card that prompted it all, this is actually the scent of an Ethiopian manuscript. And if you have not handled Ethiopian manuscripts, or maybe you have, they smell completely differently from European manuscripts. Part of it is having had sat in incense-laden ceremonies for so often. Also, the parchment in Ethiopian manuscripts is prepared slightly differently from European parchment. And so that's actually what got us started on this whole thing. We had heard that an organization called the Institute of Digital Archaeology in Oxford in the UK had recreated the scent of an Ethiopian manuscript. And so that kind of got us all excited. And so we reached out to them, and they were excited to talk with us because the president is actually from Baltimore originally, much to our surprise. So he was very excited to work with us and was very kind to create the new scent of berbere spice for us, and to let us use the manuscript scent. And they also had the incense already that they had produced. So this was an element that people really enjoyed, kind of across all levels, from children to older folks. And so that's something that will be also included in the Peabody, Essex, and Toledo versions of the exhibition. So that said, I mentioned that the exhibition really began with some of these foundational stories and things you need to know about Ethiopia. And so we have here on the wall here a type of painting that you might really enjoy, and you can hear my children are now fighting in the background. It was a short-lived bit of peace. So here on the wall we have two versions of the legend of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, their meeting. Some of you might even own some of these paintings, because these were produced starting in the very late 19th century, really picked up in popularity in the mid 20th century, and were often given to diplomats. You could also buy them as a tourist. And so this is a type of painting that, again, was kind of developed for that type of market, but now finds itself in museum collections today. So the one I show on the screen now is from the Walters collection. It lived in our storage, and I had no idea that it was there until our paintings conservator, Karen French, told me about it. She actually started working at the Walters right as the African Zion show started at the Walters. And so she's been long engaged in Ethiopian art and culture. And she and I went to Ethiopia together in January of 2020. Little did we know the world was about to fall apart. We were able to travel throughout Ethiopia, especially in the sort of, hot spots in the north, Aksum, Lalibela, Gondar, Bahir Dar, and so forth, and as well as Addis Ababa as well. So this particular painting, if you're not familiar with them, tells the story of the meeting of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. So the Queen of Sheba is one of these figures who was claimed by many different places, but Ethiopia certainly claimed her as an Ethiopian queen. She heard of the great wisdom of King Solomon, and she traveled to meet him. They have a political debate where they're matched intellect for intellect, but of course he has other designs on her, and so he winds up, the short version of the story is he tricks her into sleeping with him. They conceive a son who they name Menelik, who grows up in Ethiopia. And then when Menelik comes of age, he goes back to meet his father, King Solomon, and also is welcomed, but in fact is homesick for Ethiopia. So he decides to go back, and his father says, well, I hope you don't go, but if you must, please take my best men with you. And that's all well and good. But it turns out the best men do not want to leave the Ark of the Covenant behind. And so they leave at dead of night. They take the Ark of the Covenant with them. Here's them on the boat with the Ark of the Covenant. And then they take it back to Aksum, which is in this last panel here. I'm going to actually collapse all of you so I can see myself where I'm pointing. And you can see here are the stelae, the Aksumite stelae again. The Ark of the Covenant is said to be in one church in Aksum, and it is watched over by one priest, and when he passes, another one takes over. And so whether it's there or not, the idea that it is on Ethiopian soil is an incredibly important thing to know. One of these foundational stories about Ethiopia and sort of the Solomonic kings who follow from King Menelik. Most of the kings that follow Menelik the First are trace their lineage back to Menelik and Solomon. There are a few who didn't, but and this lasts all the way up through Haile Selassie, who of course ruled Ethiopia for most of the 20th century, maybe when some of you were in Ethiopia yourselves. And so very important story for the history of Ethiopia. Whoops, let's see, there we go. And so as you proceeded into the gallery, we get into the three Abrahamic faiths in Ethiopia, all three of which have incredibly long histories. This is the section that addresses Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity, which came to Ethiopia in the 4th century. King Azana of Ethiopia converted to Christianity himself in the early 4th century, and then declared Ethiopia a Christian nation. And so, as you might imagine, this then required all sorts of objects and books and eventually icons to be produced for use in Ethiopian church ceremony. So we had this incredible blow up of an Ethiopian Orthodox church procession, which is happening outside in the open air. This is part of sort of the end of the mass. The priests and the clergy and also the congregation comes out and circumambulates the church in the open air. So the priests are shaded by umbrellas. And so we have an example of the umbrella from the Peabody Essex. We have an example of a woman's dress, often worn to special occasions in general, but also especially to Christian church ceremonies. We have hand crosses that the priests carry. We had processional crosses as well that the priests carry here. One of the priests carries a sistrum or a rattle, and we have a couple of examples of those in the exhibition. And also we even have a carrying case. It's a sort of processional cross in its carrying case there, as well as some manuscripts with some music, meliket, musical notation in the manuscripts. And so just a couple of details of one of the incredible hand crosses we had on display. This is from the Walters collection. If you see Wham at the bottom of the slide, that means Walters Art Museum. This is a kind of unusual example. Typically the handle is just a straight piece of wood or metal, but in this case, it's actually a carved figure. And the square that you see at the bottom of Ethiopian hand crosses is an evocation of those tablets of the Ark of the Covenant, of the laws, the 10 Commandments, taken down by Moses and now thought to be in Ethiopia. Every Ethiopian Orthodox church has a replica of the tablets, or known as the tabot, to sanctify that church. And the only person who can access the tabot is the priest of the church. And here we have one of these processional crosses, not on its staff, but we did have it on display on a staff in our exhibition. We also had it displayed with textile hangings, which is the appropriate way to dress an Ethiopian Orthodox cross. That's why it has these loops at the bottom to receive that textile. This is my favorite one in the Walters collection. It is obviously an overall large cross shape, but then it has many other crosses embedded in it. And then the crosses themselves are embedded within interlace. So every single time those pieces of interlace cross each other, you have another cross created. So I sat down with this thing and actually counted up how many crosses there were, and there's about 97 crosses in this piece. So the sign of the cross and the shape of the cross is absolutely crucial and significant to Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity. Obviously, many other types of Christianity as well, but you can really see that in these examples. We also touched upon in this intro section Islam in Ethiopia. So the Prophet Muhammad actually sent exiles from Saudi Arabia to Ethiopia during his own lifetime. And so we have Islam in Ethiopia dating back to the 7th century CE. We have the exiles settling in the eastern part of Ethiopia and eventually creating a city that's today known as Harar, which many of you may have been to. This became an incredible center for Islamic learning, book production, Quran production. And so this is where the loans for the exhibition started to come in, because although we have an incredible collection of Islamic manuscripts at the Walters, we actually have none from Ethiopia. So on the left, you see an example from the Malikian collection, a private collection of many different types of materials, but a good selection of manuscripts produced in Harar. So we had 3 of these on view. This is just one of them there. And this, just to give a sense of, what is still a very vibrant center of Islamic culture and Muslim culture in Ethiopia. And I paired that with a Quran that we do have in our collection from Africa, perhaps from Nigeria, certainly West Africa, that we have, like I said, in our collection. And I think you can see a lot of synergies there in terms of the color palette being used, the type of decoration. And so just to kind of show that Ethiopia is part of the greater Islamic manuscript tradition in Africa. Also, I touched upon, I'll back up just to say that I also touched upon Judaism in Ethiopia. We think that before the arrival of Christianity in Ethiopia, many Ethiopians were actually practicing a form of Judaism. Again, you can think back to King Solomon and his great sort of influence moving forward. And talking about most of what we had in the show were examples of 20th century objects produced by the Beta Israel, or the House of Israel, Ethiopian Jews in in Ethiopia. Many of you will know that the modern day history of the Beta Israel is that beginning in the 1980s, that community was airlifted out in several campaigns to Israel, where most of them live today. I actually met an Ethiopian Jew in Addis Ababa when I was there last fall, which I was quite surprised to hear from him. He was actually a college student and he had come back to Ethiopia to study, and so it was great to sort of talk with him a little bit about that. In addition to the three Abrahamic faiths, I also have a section in the introduction about Ethiopia's southwest. So Ethiopia obviously is a very, very diverse country. It's not just about all the places that I've been showing in the north. We also have an incredible three-dimensional sculptural tradition in the south of Ethiopia, which may even remind you of other sorts of sculpture you've seen from other parts of Africa. The particular figure that I show you here is from the Konso culture in southwest Ethiopia. This would have been part of a series of figures, memorial figures displayed together. So this is actually the wife. It would have all been centered around the husband. We had his sculpture as well on loan from the Brooklyn Museum. And this is, again, there would have been other smaller figures there representing the king's retinue, representing maybe people that he had conquered during his lifetime. And as I said, this is where the loans started to come in, because we do not have any sort of representation of this in our own collection. In fact, most US collections do not have this represented in their collections if they show Ethiopian art. So there were 25 lenders to the exhibition from the US, from Europe, and also I mentioned at the beginning from Ethiopia as well. So some of you might be familiar with the Institute of Ethiopian Studies in Addis Ababa, sort of the main, sometimes it's referred to as the ethnological museum in Addis. I like to think of it actually as the fine art museum in Addis, because you have an incredible representation of icons, sculpture, manuscripts, crosses, so forth in that museum. And we were very lucky to partner with them and to receive 13 loans from the Institute of Ethiopian Studies that we went to bring back in October last year to Baltimore, and those pieces will be traveling to the Peabody, Essex, and Toledo as well. It was important for me to work with colleagues there and to understand how they are currently displaying Ethiopian art, how they would like to in the future. Of course, their issue is always finding funding to update their display, but they have an incredibly rich collection, very huge collection of Ethiopian art, only a fraction of which is on view. And so we're very glad to be able to show at least a portion of that to American audiences. And finally, in the introduction section, a discussion of Ethiopic language in Ethiopian. I'm just going to see if I have a picture of this. I do not. No. We had a wonderful display that our visitor experience department worked on. It looked kind of like a writing desk. And on that writing desk was the first two lines of the Ge'ez alphabet. Some of you, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Ge'ez. It's a language that goes back to the 1st, 2nd century CE in Ethiopia. It was the language of the church. It was the language of the government for quite a long time. And today it's basically only used in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. However, the alphabet itself is the basis for the Amharic alphabet, the Tigrinya alphabet, and so forth. We had our second community voice on an iPad in this area, where we interviewed Dawit Mulane, who is a Ethiopian Orthodox deacon. He is also a graduate student at Howard University, and he teaches Ge'ez as well. He was actually my Ge'ez teacher. One of my fun pandemic projects was to learn Ge'ez, and he talks about the significance of learning Ge'ez in the modern day. Why is it important to still learn Ge'ez? We interviewed some of his students at Howard, which was a great experience. And like I said, that is one of the videos that's available on our YouTube channel at the Walters that you can watch his interview. So this comes into play, the Ethiopic language, not just in the manuscripts that were in the exhibition, but also in even icon painting. And many of you will be familiar with the fact that an icon like here on the left, you actually have many of the figures with Ge'ez inscriptions directly on them, identifying who they are. There's a long inscription here along the frame of the piece. It's absolutely integral to icon painting, and so not just in text, but also in crosses, which often have inscriptions, icons, so forth. And so I mentioned at the very beginning, as people were trickling in, the artist Bosene Khosrow, who was born and raised in Addis. He trained at the Ale Fine Arts School at Addis Ababa University, a famous fine arts school that still exists today. He emigrated to the US and took up his MFA at Howard University in Washington, where he trained with Skünder Bogosian, who had already arrived in the early 1970s. And I mentioned before that I learned recently that they were half brothers, actually, Skünder and Bosene. They had the same mother. And so Bosene is an interesting figure because he's very captivated with that Ethiopic language. And what you see here is a sort of abstract representation of Amharic letters, but of course you can actually pick out individual letters that are in fact the true letter form. And I mentioned that I had the opportunity to meet Bosene back in March of 2020 and to talk to him about, what is he thinking here? What was he looking towards? And he in fact did cite not just the language itself and the alphabet itself, but also icons where you have those texts embedded in the image and how those just work seamlessly together. So we have one example of his work here. It's called Wax and Gold. And some of you might know the concept of wax and gold. I'm going to do it. It's a very complex concept that's very important in Ethiopia in the most reductive way I can do. Essentially what it is showing is this idea of it's either refers to a poem or a work of art or what somebody says to you. There's sort of the surface meaning, that's the wax. And then if you kind of melt that away, if you dig that away, you get to the gold, the sort of true meaning underneath. And so even with Bosene, he actually has the word for Ethiopia embedded in here, which I didn't know until very recently in this painting. I don't read Amharic. I can do okay with Ge'ez. And so he has written the Amharic word for Ethiopia in this painting. So again, what I wanted to do in this exhibition was somebody at the beginning was asking me about contemporary artists, and it was very important for me to include examples of contemporary art in the exhibition because so many Ethiopian contemporary artists are actually referring back to historical Ethiopian artworks. And so what you see in the exhibition is in fact that these two paintings I have on the screen were side by side in the exhibition, not sort of the contemporary art at the end of the show chronologically where it works, but actually side by side with these works. And I should mention that I had even more help with this exhibition from the artist Sade Makonnen, who some of you might know. She was born and raised in Washington, still works there today. She's Ethiopian American, and I asked her to write the labels for the contemporary pieces in the exhibition. I thought it was very important and could be very interesting to hear her perspective as a practicing artist, as a curator, as an Ethiopian American living in the diaspora community here in Washington, to kind of hear her response to these pieces and her perspective. So if you see the exhibition elsewhere, you will also see her words on those particular labels. So just another view as we transition from green to yellow in the exhibition. Here on the wall, this is actually the portion of the art from the Beta Israel community from Ethiopian Jews in this area here. And then the beginning of the chronological sweep with the yellow section where you have the first contacts that we know of that Ethiopia had, documented contacts with South Arabia, again, right across, just 20 miles away across the Red Sea. And we have various objects here, both South Arabian alabaster carvings and displaying also South Arabian language, which is actually one of the origins of Ethiopic language. And also we have some an Ethiopian manuscript here where you have a lot of the same animals being shown in both media, and also some of the compositional forms are the same between those two types of works. And then as we turn in this direction in front of the Aksumite mural, we have this wonderful coin display. So we shift into the ancient Aksumite Empire. Aksum was one of the four great ancient empires. Greece, Rome, might be familiar with Persia as well, but Aksum was the fourth and had quite a wide reach in the ancient period. So we show the coins, which are basically how we know the names of the Aksumite empires were from their coins that survive. So we show various coins there alongside some Roman coinage as well to kind of show the tradition that it's coming from. Oh, there's our South Arabian connection. Now you can actually see it. So we have here is your South Arabian or Sabaean. Some of the letter forms actually make their way into Ge'ez. And then if you look at this South Arabian alabaster with these ibex figures that are kind of put in these boxes, you get the very same type of composition in an Ethiopian manuscript from much, much later, actually from about 1500 years later. If you go to the National Museum in Addis Ababa, you will see a large niche that has these very same ibexes in boxes all the way around the edge of the niche. And obviously, this is something that was found in Ethiopia. So South Arabian artists are kind of traveling back and forth, but also they are including animals that are indigenous to Africa in their artwork. So you can see pretty clearly that exchange happening there. So getting to the coinage, I show you a couple of examples here of how you can, first of all, we have documentation of the Aksumite rulers. We also have a very clear visual on the conversion of King Azana. So in his coinage, and here's, by the way, a Roman coins, you get an example of what those look like. Where you see with King Azana, his earlier coins, his symbolism that he uses is a crescent and a disc, which is actually a symbol that you find in South Arabian sculpture. And then when he converts to Christianity, he places the sign of the cross on his coins. So this is not an Azana coin, but it's just another example of how the cross starts to appear on those coins. So they actually show that shift from one to the other. I just want to point out this incredible design by our designer, Katie Neighbor, and also our incredible mount maker, Adam Franchino. These coins are incredibly hard to display and hard to see. So we had them kind of floating in front of the Aksumite landscape, the place where the coins were made. This is something I actually stole from another exhibition called Caravans of Gold. If any of you saw that exhibition in either Chicago, Toronto, or Washington, the Toronto iteration had the coins kind of floating in front of a Saharan landscape. And I thought, oh, maybe I can do that for the Ethiopian coins. And it was really effective and people really enjoyed seeing them that way. I'm going to take a running leap forward because I know that we are sort of close to 6:45 here, and I know you want some time for questions. We move on to Coptic Egypt. Of course, this is lots of connections there. We have, and that's actually not Coptic Egypt, that's Byzantium, but we have lots of connections with Coptic Egypt because the Ethiopian bishop, sort of the head of the Ethiopian church, was always appointed from Alexandria. They had a Coptic Orthodox bishop from the beginning of Christianity in Ethiopia from the 4th century all the way up till 1959. So those churches are very closely connected throughout their history. In that section on Coptic Egypt, we also have that recording I mentioned of a church ceremony in St. Michael's Church in Washington, which people really enjoyed. I even had some visitors from the Church of St. Michael's towards the end of the show. Some of the members of the children's choir were seeing them, spotting themselves in the video, which is really incredible. Again, you can watch that video on our YouTube channel. I want to talk a little bit about Armenia because those connections go way back. Armenia and Ethiopia are not geographically close to each other, but the two churches were also intertwined from the 4th century, Armenia being the first Christian nation and Ethiopia the second Christian nation on the planet. And so their connections were certainly through the churches, but also Armenian merchants were traveling throughout the area. Things like manuscripts, icons, crosses are all portable, so you can transport objects. Artists travel. This is the way that you get different motifs traveling. And so this is a pairing that I've had in my earliest PowerPoint for the exhibition. We have on the right an Armenian gospel book, and on the left an Ethiopian gospel book, the same section showing the canon tables of the manuscript. This is a kind of concordance showing you the same story throughout different gospels among the 4 gospels. If you look at this Armenian manuscript, it dates to 966. It's actually the earliest Armenian illuminated manuscript in a US collection. It's one of the Walters manuscripts. And then about 500 years later, you have this portion of an Ethiopian gospel book. And I think you can see a lot of the same motifs here. You've got birds between the two. You have the use of interlace. Even the column decoration is very similar with these chevrons. And so even though these pieces are 500 years apart, you have a lot of connections there artistically because of this circulation of Christian manuscripts, Christian objects around and throughout this region. Moving on to connections with Europe. So we shift to the 15th century, and our designer Katie came up with this idea for sort of an icon wall. In the 15th century, you have King Sciacca of Ethiopia declaring that every Ethiopian church must have an icon of the Virgin Mary. This was not the case before. So there becomes this great boom in icon making. The earliest icons that we have surviving from Ethiopia are from the 15th century. This is also the time where Ethiopia is sending envoys out to Europe. It is coming back with liturgical objects, icons from Europe. It is also coming back sometimes with Italian artists who are working then at the Ethiopian court side by side with the Ethiopian artists. And very clear, the story, if you read about this phenomenon sort of in the last 10, 20 years, you get this reference to the idea that Italian artists come in and then the Ethiopians start painting icons and they're copying from Italian artists. And I think one of my main points of this show is to show that, in fact, that is not what is happening at all. There is very much a conversation being had between the two. And so I show here, and what you saw in these central two archways are an icon on the left by the Ethiopian artist Fede Seon, who was working at the court of Zara Yacob in the 15th century. And then on the right, a painting by the workshop of a Venetian painter, Bartolomeo Vivarini, of, again, another Virgin and Child, produced in Venice, but really from the same time period. Both of those, one produced in likely Oxum, where the court was at that time, and then on the right from Venice. And I think if you look at these two side by side, you have a very similar compositional arrangement. You have the same relationship between mother and child, but the Ethiopian artist is very much showing it in the Ethiopian vocabulary. So this incredible use of textile pattern. You also have very long inscriptions on the figures. You also have Mary and Christ framed by the archangels Gabriel and Mary, which was very characteristic of Ethiopian icons of the Virgin, still is today. And I paired it also with this contemporary piece by the photographer Ida Malune, who is from Washington. She's from Addis Ababa, but she actually also trained at Howard University in Washington. She is back in Africa today. She organizes many photography fairs to sort of raise up younger African artists, not just in Ethiopia, but also in West Africa. And I love this photo from the Museum of Modern Art because it really shows that very powerful figure of this woman who is very much dressed like the Virgin as you see her in icons, even the same sort of blessing hand gesture, but a very modern take on it, even evoking African body painting as well. I should say that the Peabody Essex was so inspired by this photo that they actually acquired several works by Ida that they will be including in their iteration of the exhibition. I think about 5 or 6 additional photos in addition to the one that you see on the screen. So a real inspiration for in this exhibition. And then we get into the red section where we start to get into the 16th, 17th centuries and moving forward in time. Let me just see what I have next. Okay, so we had here the shift of the capital city to Gondar in, again, northern Ethiopia, where you have a court that was a huge patron of the arts. You have panel paintings, manuscripts being produced, more incredible royal commissions. You can't really see it here, but we have 3 processional crosses with their fabric textile drapery. The centermost cross was commissioned by Queen Mentaweb of Gondar, and it comes to us from the Institute of Ethiopian Studies in Ethiopia. And that is, you can see, if you see it in person, it's the most grand sized cross. And so you get the sense that it is that royal commission. I wanted to point out these 2 pieces here by artist Helena Metaferia. Helena was born and raised here in Maryland. She's a graduate of Morgan State University here in Baltimore. She's a professor of fine art at Brown University today. And she has done some incredible things that are inspired by the crowns of Ethiopian queens in the Gondarian period. She has a series that she calls Headdresses. And she photographs women that she knows, African-American women that she knows today, and creates crowns or headdresses for them out of collage. And the collage are actually scenes from civil rights era, US civil rights era archives that she has gathered herself and used to create a collage to create these crowns. I bring her up because she is related to this final video screen here. Her father, Getachew Metaferia, is a political science professor at Morgan State University, and we had a great event here at the Walters that paired the two of them on stage. He born in Ethiopia, she born here in Maryland, and both of them really responding to Ethiopian history and culture and art in their individual work. So on this final video screen, I took this photo very early on. We hadn't quite installed his video, but he talks about this painting right here, which, as many of you will know, depicts the Battle of Adwa, a very significant event in 1896, where you have the first Italian invasion trying to overtake Ethiopia. And of course, as you know, Ethiopia succeeding in quashing the Italians and kicking them out of Ethiopia. Very important to remember that Ethiopia was never ever colonized, very significant point in its history and for just African history in general, the only the only country not colonized. And so we have this incredible painting from the National Museum of African Art, the Smithsonian, on loan to us to show that Battle of Adwa. Here on the left is the Ethiopian army led by Menelik II, again, named after the original Menelik, and then the Italian forces on the right side. And of course, St. George at the top, patron saint of Ethiopia, helping the Ethiopians to win that battle. The Adwa was a battle that happened on March 2nd, 1896, and it is celebrated every year around that time. And so this was kind of our closing ceremony for the exhibition, was on actually, I'm sorry. Yeah, so it was March 2nd, and we had some nods to the Battle of Adwa happening during our closing ceremony festivities. It's celebrated every anniversary, not just in Ethiopia, but also right in our neighborhood in Silver Spring, Maryland as well. And that may be the end of the presentation. It does go up to the exhibition does go up to the present day, sort of Ethiopia in the modern era, on the global stage. There's a nod to Haile Selassie. We have actually a cloak that belonged to Haile Selassie that's been in our collection for the last 20 years on view, beautiful velvet royal cloak. We have examples of contemporary Ethiopian artists who are responding to the present moment in sort of modern day Ethiopia and Ethiopia on the world stage. The whole point of the exhibition is that Ethiopia was always on the world stage, but many of us are more familiar with the role of Haile Selassie and his diplomatic role in kind of all the relationships that he kept up with powers that be outside of Ethiopia, including coming to Washington, meeting John F. Kennedy, giving actually a manuscript copy of a Ethiopic Bible to Howard University again, and really just kind of bringing everything full circle and what is Ethiopia sort of in the world today. And I put on the screen now the dates of the exhibition, obviously sadly now closed at the Walters Art Museum. Thank you to those of you who came and saw it here in Baltimore. We'll be opening at the Peabody Essex Museum on April 13th and running until July 7th. And then finally, we'll travel on to the Toledo Museum of Art. I think that date is wrong. It should be the 18th, excuse me, of August. I'm sorry, the 17th of August. At the Toledo Museum of Art in Toledo, Ohio, not Toledo, Spain. People are confused. The Toledo Museum of Art, August 17th through November 10th, 2024. So I would encourage you to please see it at those places if you can. Enjoy the wonderful programming that they're going to be having. Tell your family and friends. I will certainly be at least at the opening of both of those events. I think I'm giving some tours at the Peabody Essex during their opening festivities. So at this point, I will unshare my screen and come back to see all of you. And thank you for listening. And I'm very happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great. Betty from our group had a question. Some of us have acquired objects of known or unknown origin, artists known and unknown. I happen to have a woodcut by an expat living in us, or who lived, I don't know if he's still alive, Falaka Armida Ymir. That name is of any known. But what should we be doing as we consider making donations, loans of art objects that we might possess?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was not at all surprised that this started to happen sort of immediately upon opening this exhibition to me. Interestingly, back at the time of the African Zion show, we had exactly one Ethiopian object in the Walters collection, and that was actually an accidental acquisition where one of our founders, Henry Walters, had purchased this piece thinking that it was a Coptic Egyptian cross, and then it turns out it is not. It's an Ethiopian cross. And so that was the only piece we had in our collection as of 1993. And after that point, we started to be given objects. We started to purchase Ethiopian objects, and really our collection, which is now, as I said, 225 objects, that was acquired mostly within the 5 years after the African Zion show, in fact, from the generosity of donors. The situation, I would say, for the Walters, at least, is different today. And there is a lot of, and there's actually a whole wall panel in the exhibition devoted to provenance. We are collect in a very different way today, especially for things that come from places like Ethiopia. We collect very differently than was collected, say, in the 1990s, or certainly going back before that. So what we have at the Walters today is a very strong collection of Ethiopian Christian art. And me, now as the curator in charge of the collection, I am trying to do my due diligence to dig back and to find out the ownership history of these pieces. When did they leave Ethiopia? How did they leave Ethiopia? And in many cases, it's almost impossible to know. But I'm doing my best because this is very important as far as collection building today for any museum, really. It should be, and it is an important part of our collecting policy. So what I would say is if you are looking to donate or sell anything to other museum collections, obviously many of these pieces deserve to be cared for properly and preserved. However, what I think most museums would ask you is, I can't imagine most of you have receipts for these things. We love receipts. We love any records of when you acquired them, even a simple thing of, I acquired this when I lived in Ethiopia in the 1960s. Do you have that passport from the 1960s showing that you were there during certain time periods? We do not have an MOU. The U.S. does not have an MOU with Ethiopia, wherein there's not sort of a set agreement about objects that might pass from Ethiopia to the U.S. It also depends on the vintage of the object. So if it's sort of mid 19th century and later, there's a different set of rules that apply to it versus sort of more historic art pieces. You didn't really want to hear all of this, did you? All I can say is it is complicated, and it should be complicated, frankly. So it depends very much on how you acquired the pieces, when you acquired the pieces, and is extremely helpful when you have any sort of record of how and when you purchased them and how they made it out of the country.
Yeah.
So as far as the Walters collection goes, I can only really speak for myself. Other museums may feel differently. We have a very strong collection of Ethiopian Christian art. At this point, I am, if I were to further build the collection and build it responsibly, I would want to include other aspects of Ethiopia. What about Ethiopian Islamic art? What about Ethiopian Jewish art? What about art from the south of Ethiopia? So those are the ways that I am thinking. I can also tell you that one of our partners, when we partner with another institution, it's usually because they have some sort of stake in the exhibition. So for the Peabody Essex, as I discovered, I always knew they had a collection of Ethiopian art. There's a very skinny catalog from 1976 with maybe 50, 60 objects in it. Very strong collection. Started to work with them and came to find out they have over 500 Ethiopian objects that are not typically on view. And so for them, it made sense. And their collection is much more wide-ranging, actually. So they have basketry, they have Ethiopian Jewish objects, so forth and so on. We have about 20 of their objects in our exhibition. And so, which is, again, co-organized with them. So, they may feel differently about acquisitions that they make, but I can only speak for really myself. So I think that it's complicated. Let's just say it's
Yeah,
complicated.
okay.
And
Couple of,
and
yeah,
I should also say that all of us have very limited storage space. So at this point, in terms of making acquisitions, we do thorough provenance research, and we also really have to think about, you know, can we store it? Can we display it? Does it fit in that way, physically fit into our collection? That's the sad reality of the museum world. So
yeah.
yeah.
Another commenter mentioned that there's the Met has an African Byzantium
Mhm.
exhibit, and how talking about how your exhibit relates to that. And just to throw a couple other things into the mix before you proceed with questions. Wonder if you have any comments on everyday objects as art. I saw some baskets in your
Mhm.
exhibits.
Yep.
Of course, umbrellas are part of the liturgical ritual part
Mhm.
of thing. The Beit Israel objects are often everyday usage objects, coffee making.
Yes.
So that aspect. And the other thought I had of what do we know about the artist class, about the people who produce this art? I don't know how far back we would know, but what do we know about, the court of Sciacca? Were they
Mhm.
patrons of the art, or how did an artist class exist?
Mhm.
And going forward, we know, something more of the current situation. So relationship to the Met exhibit,
Mhm. Yep.
uh, everyday objects, and the artist class are some points you might want to respond to.
Yeah, so having the African and Byzantium exhibition at the Met, and now it's traveling to Cleveland. We actually closed on the same day as the African Byzantium show. So from my standpoint as a medievalist, it was actually I found that a lot of folks who I know from sort of academic circles and curatorial circles really tried to hit both exhibitions at one time. So I think it was mutually beneficial to kind of see those two together between New York and Baltimore. It's just, a 2.5 hour train ride between the two. So when I first started this exhibition, like I said, 7 years ago, I devised my academic advisory committee, and that included Andrea Acci, who was the curator of the exhibition at the Walters. It included, I'm sorry, at the Met, included Helen Evans, who is now curator emerita of the medieval department at the Met. It included Kristen Windmiller Luna, who's the curator from Cleveland of the African Byzantium show. I think the show was a glimmer in all of their eyes when I started their, the work with the academic committee. And in fact, at a certain point, Andrea and Helen recused themselves from the committee because they were getting too deep into their own work for their show. So happy to say that Kristen is one of my catalog authors. She wrote a great essay about the Jesuits in Ethiopia and their role in kind of conveying artistic traditions from Europe. And, like I said, it was, I think, beneficial to have those exhibitions at the same time. I think we both saw increased foot traffic. Very different approach for their exhibition, and kind of a different scope. So my exhibition was very Ethiopia centric, whereas Ethiopia was sort of one component for them, and it was all very much tied to the Byzantine Empire. Whereas I was sort of showing the 2,000-year history that we have visual culture existing from Ethiopia, and really keeping Ethiopia as the fulcrum around which everything was spinning. So like I said, I think we both had incredible objects, and those shows will live on at least a little bit longer. So if you still have the chance to see them, I would encourage you to see both shows. Your second question, everyday objects. Yes. So, this is always a question that we have. I think in the case of the basketry, this is incredibly intricate work with grasses. In particular, not just the Beta Israel community, but the basketry that was represented on the card here is in fact from Hadar. So that's also a very important bit of cultural production from that primarily Muslim city in the East. And I loved, actually, I can't believe I didn't have an image of it, but I loved the section devoted to Hadar. It's sort of midway through the show, where we had a big blow up of the interior of a Harari home, which some of you might know is covered often floor to ceiling with basketry. They are decorative. They are functional. They hold food, they're used for serving food, and also their patterns convey different sorts of meaning. So in that case, they have both a functional everyday aspect, but also they have a sort of artistic and aesthetic aspect as well. And same is true of the Beta Israel objects. I did not have any coffee pots, but what I did have was the same kind of black glazed terracotta or earthenware that is used for those coffee pots. But they were sort of, the objects I had were more sort of kind of figural decorative objects. Just happened to be that, the Peabody Essex didn't have any coffee pots, but they did have some of these other types of objects made in that same kind of earthenware. So I would say it's sort of a fine line. It really just kind of depends from object to object. We do not have any basketry in our collection. We did not have any of this Ethiopian or Jewish sculpture. But in fact, very important part of the culture and has significant aesthetic sort of edge to it as well. Your third question, class of the artists. Yeah, I think we have some records going back of sort of where artists stood. I mean, I think artists who worked, for example, in the court of Zara Jacob, like Fede Seon, they were certainly of more elevated status. They were producing things like icons. These are objects that are considered to actually contain the spirit of the actual saint or individual who is being depicted. And so that's a very sort of powerful thing to be able to produce, and obviously would have required a lot of training. Same is true for anybody who was writing manuscripts, copying holy texts, for example, in a monastic context quite often. But also sometimes in a royal context as well. And this is, there we go. Now we're getting a little antsy around here. And so there's also documentation that, for example, metal workers, I think somebody just turned their speak on. Metal workers were considered sort of a lower status. And so, and this has to do with, different hierarchies of what medium artists were working in. So I think there was a bit of a hierarchy there. And as I say, some people were working for the court, some people were working, independently. If you are attached to the court or attached directly to the church, that would give you a bit more status. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. We got one mention of many mentions of appreciation of the wonderful presentation. One specifically about the Armenian Ethiopian connection, and of course, Skundar was Armenian and Ethiopian individual.
Yes.
And I don't know if the history is that how they are. I guess it was Menelik the second who welcomed the Armenian refugees from as fellow Christians during the conflict with the Ottoman Turks that brought the Armenian community to Ethiopia. It's what I understand the history to be. So how are we doing on time? Cindy, do we want to wrap this up, or what's your pleasure?
Oh, I think
Cindy, you need to
mic
unmute.
Is not on, Cindy.
Cindy, you need to unmute.
Okay. I think some people want to get going and go have a green beer. And it sounds like Christine's children might need her.
I don't know if they're old.
I need a green beer.
So I think we'll wrap it up, but this has been recorded and I will put it on YouTube. And it's really easy to find the Walter Art Museum website. You just have to Google it, and then the things from Ethiopia will show up, and you just click on it and they're right there.
Yeah, that was
So
the exhibition, if I could just step in, the exhibition is indeed still on our website. What I put in the chat, if we have one more moment for people to click it, if they like, is actually the link to our YouTube channel, which you can go to YouTube and Google us, but also I just dropped in the direct link to the Ethiopia videos on our YouTube channel. So please spend some time with them if you can, and please come to see the show if you can as well, or buy the catalog when it comes out.
Perfect. Perfect.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, and I just
Thank you
copied
so
the link,
much.
so I'll also put it on our Facebook page. Okay, is there, if there isn't anything else, then thank you so much for joining us. And Christine, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It just made us want to be there. And it looked fabulous.
We'll see if
So-
it becomes possible. Someday peace
Yeah.
will come. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Thank you all, and thank you all for your service in Ethiopia and Eritrea.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah. I have proof of my Ethiopian residence with my Falaka Amida Ymir purchased in 1970 on near the piazza, or an art dealer near the piazza. That's what I could tell you.
Okay,
right.
well, thank you so much and
Thank you
good
so much.
night. And we will be having another virtual event in a month or so. So we will email everyone and let you know about that. Thanks again. Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Leo.
Fantastic.
Thank you,
Okay.
Cindy.
Thank
And,
everyone for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
okay. Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night. Thanks, everyone.